Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live stream interview from your location in the world. My name is Nicholas Lear, and I'm the managing editor of the Oxford Political Review. Today, I'm joined by a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Anthony Scaramucci is an American financier and the founder of Sage Capital. Most people know him, though, for his turbulent brief stint as White House communications director. Mooch, as he is known, traded in life on Wall Street to join Donald Trump's campaign and then his transition committee. Officially without a role in the new administration, he was appointed communications director on the 21st of July, 2017, but shortly dismissed thereafter. And he is now, of course, a vocal critic of President Trump and actively campaigned to support Joe Biden. Anthony, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Nicholas, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So straight off the bat, just to set the record straight, most people say 10, Wikipedia says 6. How many days were you in the White House?
Well, let's go by when the president tweets about me and he calls me an unstable nut job and a low-life loser, he always acknowledges the fact that I was there for 11 days. So I would like to go with the 11 days. And, you know, I know you guys in Great Britain, sometimes you want to hit me and say it was 6 days or 10 days, but it hurts my feelings. And I'm a very sensitive person, Nicholas. So I would like to stipulate that I was there for 11 days or 954,000 seconds. Sometimes I say it that way. It makes me feel better.
We'll make sure you're not shortchanged there. We'll come back to your time in the White House just a little bit. But first, let's start off with the headline, the news that we're trying to take in, we're trying to make sense of, and that is the election. It's fair to say it's been a tense 36 hours. We were just discussing it for both campaigns. We already know that the election is set to become the largest voter turnout by raw numbers in American history. Joe Biden has got more votes than any other presidential candidate. What is the state of play right now, and how confident are you that Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States?
Well, listen, I'm a numbers person, so I just take the tabulation and do an overlay. If I look at the counties that are reporting, the specific counties in the undecided states, it looks to me like he wins Georgia and Pennsylvania. It looks like he's a toss now in Arizona, but I still think he wins Arizona. And so, as you know, any one of those states, he's one battleground state away from attaining the presidency. And so the betting markets have it at 92%. The Biden campaign, I think, seems very confident. The Trump campaign is sort of all over the place with the legal situation. They want to stop counting votes in certain areas of the country, and they want to keep counting votes in other areas of the country. And so there's a high level of hypocrisy to that. But listen, it'll resolve itself. The institutions of the American democracy that were threatened by Mr. Trump, I think, are holding, and I think the vice president will be named sometime later today, the 46th president-elect of the United States.
Very interesting. I mean, the exit poll was quite telling. It suggested that the economy was the most important issue on the minds of the American people, not COVID-19, maybe as you expect, though they are, of course, connected. But what do you think, from your point of view, explains these results that we're seeing, particularly in those Rust Belt states like Michigan and Wisconsin that were so key to Trump winning in 2016?
Well, I mean, listen, look, the president polled well in those exit polls on the economy. He does not poll well on COVID-19. And so when you take those two things, and they seem to be 1 and 2 in the exit polls, I think that's how you got that dispersion of outcome. And I want to be very objective with the president. He got 70-ish million votes. He'll likely have 74 or 75 million when all the votes are tabulated. And it's an incredible turnout for him. It's bigger than the Obama 2008 vote count. And so I want to give him a lot of credit for that. But I also would say to people, having campaigned with President Trump and having traveled the country the way I have traveled the country over the last 5 years, we have a mixed bag in the country. We have a lot of people that feel disenfranchised, disengaged from the system. And they're voting with Mr. Trump, whether we like that or not, or intellectuals disagree with them. It doesn't really matter. They're voting for him. It's creating a systemic issue for us. It's a rise of populism and nationalism. The UK is experiencing something very similar. And there's only one solution, and that is to provide policy optionality and ideas and a package of services to make these people feel that they're not left out, that they can be engaged in the system. Otherwise, they're prone to conspiracy theory, and they're prone to some of the nonsense that President Trump puts on his Twitter feed. So the good news is I do believe that the vice president will be named the 46th president-elect. You may have seen this. The FAA has cut the airspace around his home.
Yeah.
It's usually an indication that that's going to happen. And we're waiting for that to happen here. And I think it'll be an exciting day for America. And I think putting aside my personal disagreements with President Trump, which I'm of course happy to talk about, but if you just think about the anxiety that he creates with the bellicosity of the rhetoric on Twitter, the impetuosity of attacking public companies and private citizens, I mean, all of that nonsense will go by the wayside. He'll be relegated to just another private citizen ranting in all caps on Twitter. And I think that you'll dial down global anxiety as a result of that. And I think it's a good day for everybody.
Well, let's talk about Trump's response in the last, 2 days to these election results. He said to reporters 3 days before the election he wasn't going to come out and declare victory. That's exactly what he did. He also said that a fraud has been committed on the American people. And we know that that's triggered a response. You said earlier, people were protesting in Detroit last night, chanting, "Stop the vote." Ironically, they're saying the other thing in, I think it's Maricopa County, Arizona. What, in terms of his response, his team are trying to stage a legal challenge now and initiate proceedings in particular states. What do you think that will result in? Do they have a case, and when will this process be over?
Well, they don't have a case. I mean, listen, I went to law school 30 plus years ago, and I have a lot of friends of mine that are now senior partners in law firms in DC, Republican-based law firms. You can listen to Attorney Ginsburg, who's been on CNN. He's a friend of mine, Ben. Yeah. They don't think he has a case, and no credible attorney is going to take the case. I love Mayor Giuliani. I have a personal relationship with him that dates back to 1989. I choose to remember the mayor the way he was when he was helping to save our city and the way he was after 9/11. But I mean, the guy's gone full Borat now. And so, it makes me sad, frankly. And, I guess they're going to try to challenge it. And they claim they have all these legal precedents and stuff. You lost the vote. It's a democratic country. It's a democracy. The votes tabulate. And by the way, if you have an absentee ballot in the country and you're in a pandemic and someone puts in an absentee ballot, you got to count the vote. It's that simple. And I think it's very telling that one side is saying, count every single vote, and whatever the outcome is, we'll accept. And the other side is saying, count some of the votes over here, but don't count the votes over there. It's crazy. It's a very, very bad reflection on the Republican Party. And, President Trump's behavior does not surprise me, but it always surprises me that you got a loony bin of acolytes and accomplices alongside of him that are like, yeah, no problem, whatever he wants to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, presidents don't determine the outcome of an election, as you say. The process does. The voters do. And if these results do go the way most people are anticipating they will, what do you think, and President Trump better than most, he'll be like as a lame duck president before Biden's inauguration? And then just quickly, what do you think he'll do afterwards? What's his future like?
Well, I would say that he's going to do what people don't expect him to do as a lame duck president, and that's to cooperate, because he's got criminal investigations in New York and in the city of New York, the state of New York. He possibly has a federal investigation. Wow. And so it's in his best interest to cooperate. Just remember, for all your viewers and listeners out there, when the president's doing a news search, he's only searching himself. He doesn't care about anybody else. Certainly doesn't care about you. He cares about himself. And so it's in his best interest to cooperate, because he's going to try to figure out a way to keep himself and his family out of jail. And if he's successful in doing that, then I think you've got a media company potentially coming out, maybe a news channel. You could potentially have him doing something in politics. I could see him announcing on January 20th that he's running for president in 2024. Because what ends up happening is he can open up the spigot for fundraising, and then he can get out on the road with his plane and travel around the way he does. I don't know if that'll be successful for him or not. We'll have to see. This will be a humiliating loss for him. He'll be one of 3 presidents in the post-World War II era that were ousted as incumbents. And so he may not be able to do all of these things that people are talking about.
Yeah, and of course, now the election campaign is over. We don't have the full results yet, but it's a good moment to look at his presidency and his performance. Of course, you were part of the campaign team, so you know what he was trying to achieve. Objectively, looking at his time as president, do you think he's made good his promises, particularly for those blue-collar Americans that helped him to get into the White House?
Well, listen, he didn't make good on it, but he still got their votes. And so it's
Right.
telling you something. And so what he did make good on is that he is an avatar and an expression and a representative of their anger. And so when he's lighting people up on Twitter and, he would hate your guts, by the way, Nicholas, because you went to Oxford, I went to Harvard. He's a very insecure guy. He'd be very upset, and he would rail on elites. You happen to be an elite. I'm supposedly one as well. And so that's what he does. And he's got a lot of people that like that. And so, but he hasn't really delivered on policy for those people. If you look at their wages, and ultimately his legacy will be that he mishandled and malpracticed the pandemic. And that pandemic caused a toppling of the economy. And he could have handled it totally differently. They begged him to handle it differently. And I will say this to you. If he had handled the pandemic back in February the way it was recommended by the epidemiologists, he would have likely won re-election. If he had gone to the American people and said, okay, listen, we're going to do a 50-state national mask mandate, and here are the things that the epidemiologists want us to do to reduce casualties and reduce incidence of COVID-19, and he worked in coordination with the governors to do that, he likely would have won re-election, but he didn't want to do that. He's smarter than everybody else. He's a very stable genius. He's smarter than the generals. He's smarter than the epidemiologists. And so what H.R. McMaster once said about the president when I was in the White House with H.R., he said he's a reflexive guy because he needs to try to bully you intellectually, even though he may not know as much as you on a subject. He's insecure and he wants to show you how much he knows. And so he'll do the exact opposite of what you're telling him to do. Jim Mattis found that. General Kelly found that. I found that. General McMaster found that. And of course, obviously now Dr. Birch and Dr. Fauci found that. And so the reason he's left the White House, he'll be leaving the White House, is because of that systemic trait in his personality.
I mean, we're talking about COVID here and his response to it. I mentioned earlier on before we came onto this interview that England has gone into a second national lockdown today. Other countries are doing so around Europe. Dr. Fauci is, the long-standing advisor to presidents. I think he's advised 6 presidents, if I'm correct, on these serious issues. And how did you respond to the way in which Trump likes to sort of characterize Biden as on the side of the scientists? He'll listen to Fauci. Was this all just populist rhetoric, or, as you say, is he just not interested in experts and he wants to do it his way?
Yeah, unless it's security. At the end of the day, Ronald Reagan had a plaque on his desk in the Oval Office. You can get anywhere you want as long as you don't care who gets the credit. And Reagan had a tremendous amount of self-confidence. And so if you were an expert or a leading authority on somebody, he wanted to listen to you and he wanted to benefit from your knowledge. If you're ridiculously and morosely insecure, you have to bully that person and you have to try to pretend with posturing and overcompensation and bluster that you're smarter than that person. And so he ran the presidency, unfortunately, as if it were a one-man West End show or a one-man Broadway play. And you can't do that. You've got 5,000 people that he was supposed to appoint 4 years ago. He only did about 3,500 of those. And there's 4.2 million people that work in the federal government. And you have to oversee that in a technical way, in an administrative way, and also in a style way. You have to project from the presidency what you want for the American people and their aspirations. He didn't do that.
Before we turn to your own experience of working with him, and we'll look at that, just want to ask you, do you think that Trump is best interpreted as a symptom rather than a cause of the ills that afflict American politics right now?
No question. The Dr. Frankenstein, Trump is the golem. The Dr. Frankenstein is the system, and it's a process of the globalization, and it's a process of literally elites and establishment politicians ignoring the ills and the problems of a very large group of people. And so as incomes and net worth started to diverge in the country, it creates anxiety. It created anxiety in ancient Rome. It created anxiety in France. It's done it several times in the UK. And we were faced with this sort of a problem at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century. It was really Teddy Roosevelt who became the father of progressivism. And he was a Republican, but he said, okay, listen, we can't do this. We have to make sure that in our social contract that people feel aspirational and they feel that they have an opportunity. And for whatever reason, over the last 35 years, we've neglected a very large group of the population. Mr. Trump represents them. They're angry. He seized on that. I actually thought when I was working with him that he was going to provide for them a policy initiative that would help them. And I was moved by that, frankly, because I grew up like in a blue collar family. And I grew up in a situation where my dad was a crane operator who was getting an hourly wage. He worked 42 years for the same company. Neither of my parents were college educated. And so I had a lot of pathos and a lot of empathy for those people. And I still do. And frankly, we're going to work on that over the next 10 or 20 years. How are we going to solve for that in America so that we can heal the divisions, we can heal the unnecessary polemics and the unnecessary anger? Mr. Trump stokes it. I would like to be on the side of healing it.
Well, let's turn to your relationship with the president. And actually, I want to ask you, first of all, about when you parted ways. I mean, of course, you were dismissed in the 31st of July, am I right?
You could say fired, Nicholas. It's totally fine. You don't have to be that polite. I mean, I know you're all British and everything like that, but you could say, hey, man, you got your ass fired after 11 days, which is 100% what happened because I did something fireable. And I think you probably have young people that are listening to your programs. Take responsibility for your actions. I never blamed it on anybody else. I'm fully accountable for my fire.
Yeah, I mean, he was, of course, he is the founder of The Apprentice, the show. Actually, there's a UK version as well with Alan Sugar, you may have seen. But I want to turn to when you really parted ways in terms of your support for him, or indeed, your vocal criticism of him. And it was at some point, it seems to me, in August last year. Why was it specifically then?
Well, listen, I mean, just 30 seconds on the timeline. So I'm fired. I deserve to be fired. I don't take it out on the president. I don't take it out on General Kelly. I leave. I want to be loyal to the administration and loyal to the president's agenda. And I'm trying to do that. But he's separating women from the children at the border. You can't agree with that. He's denouncing our intelligence agencies. You can't agree with that. He's saying the press is the enemy of the people. I don't agree with that. I spoke out against that. And then back in July, August of 2019, he's suggesting that the women of the squad, a couple of which are African-American, one of which is Hispanic American, one is a Muslim American. He's saying they have to go back to the countries that they originally came from. And so that's a racist nativist trope. And I spoke out against that because they said that to my Italian-American grandparents. And I told Mayor Giuliani, I said that to your grandparents. Why are you disavowing your personal integrity and your personal history in America by supporting that sort of nonsense? It's almost as if Charles Lindbergh had a baby with Joe McCarthy and the baby got raised by Roy Cohn. And that baby grew up to become the president of the United States. And it got baptized by Father Coughlin. I mean, what are we doing here? That's American racism, American nativism. It should not be coming from the Oval Office in 2020. So when I made that statement, the president does what he typically does. I'm a private citizen, and he went after me. Now, I raised him and gave him millions of dollars for his campaign. I was on his transition team, and I gave hundreds of hours of media advocacy on his behalf. So he decided he was going to attack me the first week of August in 2019. I had no problem with that. I'm a big boy, and I'm a public figure. So if you're going to attack me, I'm also a New Yorker. Guess what I'm going to do, Nicholas? I'm going to attack you. And so I think I called him Fidel Adolf Trump because those were really good initials. I was trying to get the fat shaming in there. And so Fidel Adolf Trump, the notorious FAT, that sent them into, Bonkerville. And then he attacked me again. And then I'm like, wow, you're really losing your fastball. You really don't have really good Twitter skills anymore. And then he did what he's typically capable of doing because he's basically a lowlife. He went after my wife. Now, my wife is a suburban housewife. She lives out here on Long Island with me. She's never said anything publicly negative about President Trump. And he has absolutely no right to go after my wife. And he also knows that my wife and I were almost in a divorce as a result of my working for him. And so I don't know. I'll let your viewers decide. Do I look like Ted Cruz to anybody out there? Do I act like Ted Cruz? Okay, you're not going after my wife. Ted Cruz decided he was going to be a supplicant and a sycophant to Trump after Trump went after his wife. I don't even know how I could get back in the neighborhood I grew up in if I allowed that to happen. So that was it. I took the gloves off and I said, this guy's nuts. You can't go after a guy like me that's trying to support you. This guy's demagogic and he's nuts. And he's going to do something very stupid over the next 15 months. And he's not going to get reelected. And I said that at the peak polling numbers and as a peak approval numbers, because when someone's crazy like Trump, they're going to do really crazy things. And ultimately, if you got 160 million people voting, the majority of those people are going to go, okay, wait a minute, the guy's nuts. Let me vote him out of office. We got to get somebody more normal in a situation like that. There's too much responsibility in that job.
Let's just turn the clock back a little bit, though. As you say, you're fired in July 2017. August 2017, we've got the Unite the Right rallies in Charlottesville. You were critical of that. I know.
I am. You could find me on tape. I met George Stephanopoulos. I returned to television 2 weeks after I was fired. George Stephanopoulos on his show this week with George Stephanopoulos. How do you feel about the Charlottesville thing, Anthony? I said it's reprehensible. He should not talk like that. I want to be supportive of the president. There's some policy initiatives that he's doing that are quite good. There's things that he's doing for the business community, even for the African-American community. He did get a very high African-American and Hispanic American vote total in 2020 on a relative basis to other Republicans. I want to be observant of that and objective about it. But saying that there are very fine people on both sides of that situation in Charlottesville, very sorry. I reject that. And I think it's the wrong thing to say. I was on record saying that when that happened.
But that wasn't enough to then renounce your, you didn't, it wasn't an August 2019 moment where you just rejected.
Yes. Yeah, I have to own that. And I think that would be a criticism of me that I have to own. And that's my shortcomings as a human being. And that's some of my flaws. I did what many Americans did. 63 million people voted for him last time. 75 million people have voted for him this time, likely when all the votes are tabulated. And I have to own that. I have to own that he said that some of the Mexicans are rapists. I have to own the Muslim ban. I hit myself into override. And this is a cautionary tale for young viewers out there. You have to be very, very careful in life. I was tempted to go work for somebody that was going to be the president of the United States. I wanted to work in the White House. I had my self-narrative going that I was a blue-collar kid that lived a good portion of the American dream, and now I'm going to have this opportunity to work in the White House. And even though the person was ill-suited for that job and not necessarily saying and doing the right things, I was using a cognitive dissonance override to overlook that. I have to own that. And so what I would tell younger people is don't put your pride and ego into your decision-making. When you do that, your intelligence goes down and your emotions are going up, and you're going to get yourself in a perilous situation. And so that has happened to me. And maybe Mr. Trump has not changed since 2015 or 2017, but I've changed. And I think it was very important for me to speak out in 2019 to say, okay, enough of this already. There's something wrong with this guy. He's got to go.
Yeah. I mean, you characterize yourself, you haven't just said it now, but I know as a lifelong Republican. But I'm just going to take you back a little bit further. In 2008, am I right in saying that you supported Barack Obama? You helped raise money for Barack Obama's election campaign. Then in 2012, you were found tweeting support for a potential Hillary run. I mean, at what point does your Republicanism go out the window? Is it when a more favorable presidential candidate comes along? And why were you so persuaded that Trump at that time, when you joined his campaign, was the guy that you looked at and thought, actually, this guy can solve some of the problems that America's facing?
Well, I mean, listen, I'm a typical business person. You'll find that President Trump, as a private citizen, gave money to Kamala Harris. He gave money to Chuck Schumer. He gave money to Hillary Clinton. you'll find that he was a registered Democrat, and then he switched over to becoming a registered Republican. At one point, he was pro-choice, and now he's pro-life. And so for me, I'm a longstanding Republican, but I'm a centrist Republican. I like to say that I'm a socially inclusive Republican. I worked on the gay marriage initiative in New York 12 years ago. I actually worked with Vice President Biden on the global gay marriage and marriage equality initiative globally. So, I have flexible ideas in my head. Most business people do. They're adaptive people. They're not rigid philosophically. I think 2008 was a very unique situation for me. President Obama, then Barack Obama, had gone to law school with me, and we had enough friends in common. And people said to me, "Hey, could you please help the guy out?" And just to tell you how life goes, at that point, I said, "Okay, wow, this is somebody I actually know personally. He's running for president of the United States. I'm going to help the guy out because this will be the only person I know personally that'll actually be the president of the United States." I didn't realize that I would have a relationship with Joe Biden and Vice President Biden and President Trump later on in my life. But I like Barack Obama. I like President Obama. I don't like everything about his policies. I'm more Republican minded when it comes to business. But I will say this about President Obama. He got the deficit under control in the back half of his administration. That's something that President Trump did not do. And I think it's going to cost us. When you're running deficits like that, there's a group of people say deficits don't matter, but they actually do. You can study it. You have to monetize that debt. The United States can never afford to pay that debt back unless it devalues its currency. And if you go back over 49 years, when we unpinned ourselves from the Bretton Woods gold standard, you can see that we devalued that currency by about 99%. And that hurts working class families. So, listen, I'm a pragmatist, not really ideological. I actually don't even know how the hell I ended up in politics, Nicholas. I feel like I'm the Michael Corleone of politics. I was trying to get out of it, but I got brought back in. Once he attacked me personally, I said, okay, the guy's nuts, and I'm ready for the fight.
Coming back in. Well, let's talk about quickly the future of the Republican Party. This is an interesting question. Obviously, the Republicans look set to maintain a numerical advantage in the Senate. Are you optimistic for the future of the GOP without Trump's influence, without his stranglehold on the party? Or do you think that the damage he's done is irreparable and actually the party will continue along similar lines?
Well, the Trumpism and the demagoguery around it could have been reinforced by his fellow Republicans by the vote count that he got. And so they may go Trumpier than him. You've got younger acolytes of his that may decide, oh, yeah, this is great. He's Trumpy Trump. Let me go even more Trumpy. And so I hope that doesn't happen because it's nonsensical. It doesn't really serve anybody's interest to act or be like that long term. And I hope that they go for a cure for the ills of the people that they want to support, and I hope they think about all the people when they're going to go into public service, as opposed to just being an anger representative for a smaller group of people. But who knows? I think these guys are nuts, to be honest. They've lost their way. John Kennedy wrote a book 55, 60 years ago called Profiles in Courage. It was about senators that broke from their party. We have 52 senators in the Republican Party that you could write a book called Profiles in Cowardice. They couldn't break from him. They didn't have the stomach for it. I guess they were afraid of a tweet, or they were afraid of a primary. And so they lost their idealism and they lost some of their principles. So what you find about politics, a very ugly business, and most of these people are operating in their own self-interest and for the purposes of their own power preservation. And I think they'll be very gingerly around Trump. They'll treat him like walking over broken glass because he's got 180 million people on social media that follow him. And it seems like he still wants to have a presence politically in that party. Yeah. And that'll be a mistake for them, by the way. They're going to become a minority aging white party that buys catheters and MyPillows from Fox News commercial interruptions.
Well, that's the thing. So the demographics are obviously changing in the United States, and we're seeing that with these results, and the importance of these urban centers where a lot of young voters are based. But let's just look ahead. Final question to how, if Joe Biden wins, we're expecting him to do so, how he heals the wounds that have emerged in the last few years in American politics, and particularly how he regains, if at all, the confidence of those blue-collar voters or those disenchanted Trump supporters that feel so strongly that their country has been taken from them in recent years. How does he do that? How does he get them on board?
It's a very good question. I would go to the two speeches that he gave recently. One was at Gettysburg and one was down in Warm Springs, Georgia, where FDR passed away. And I think in those speeches, they're very healing. They're very unifying. He's going to be 78, I think, when he's inaugurated, or just about 78. He'll be the oldest person to ascend to the presidency in U.S. history. And I'm hoping at that level and this time in his life, he'll be a transformative post-partisan president. And he knows the Republicans in that Senate and up on the Hill, frankly, for a very long period of time. I'm hoping he can find 3 or 4 legislative initiatives where he can join those people together. I know there's common ground on education and common ground on infrastructure, and maybe he can put some things up on the tape related to the stimulus. And if those things start to happen and you're not focused on somebody's bizarre Twitter feed every day, and you're not having a president that's in the news cycle every 10 seconds and trying to make the whole thing about them, you may see that people return back to normal life, and they start to believe again that the institutions of the American democracy are holding. And I think he's going to do a good job. I think he's going to surprise people because he's at a point in his life where I think he cares less about the partisan rancor and he cares more about the legacy that he can provide to America in terms of trying to heal the nation from the great divide that we're in right now.
And of course, he's been in office before. He served as vice president, so he knows kind of what he's doing. Listen, Anthony Scaramucci, taking a lot of your time today. We covered a lot of ground. The election's still going on. We could have protracted litigation in store, but thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Okay, be well. Thank you.